So Joanna and I went to a reading the other night. It wasn't specifically a poetry reading, though. There was some poetry there. It was, I think, a good idea for a reading. It's part of a local series where writers come in and read selections from the work of other writers. So they don't read their own work. And I think this generally makes for a better reading. I mean, I've said before that I like... So two things. So I like when poets read work by other poets, partly just because I think it's a good way to get more, to pass the word along about good work. But I also think in general, when writers read selections from other writers' work, the quality of the work on balance is just higher. Like, I think it just makes for a better reading because most of the readers did what Joanna did and just picked something they liked that they thought would be good to hear. And I mean, it's not that I think when writers are reading their own work, they don't think it's good. It's just maybe their opinions are more trustworthy when it's someone else's. I mean, also like Joanna, most of the people there read work by dead writers. There was, my other prediction was, not dead writers, older writers, more, writers who work that had been out for a while by people who are, strangers, who are like well-known strangers at a distance, some of whom were dead. But my other prediction was that the risk you ran was that that writers could bring in work and just sort of merely log roll for their friends or for people they thought it would sort of they would garner brownie points by reading the work of other poets who are on the come up. My wife's family has this expression, they say on the up and up, which I've always heard to mean not illegitimate, like not involved in crime, but they use it to mean up and coming. And now I hear that more broadly. Like, I think they infected the world with their misuse, and now people use on the up and up to mean on the come up. But at any rate, there was one poet, inevitably, who read the work of another poet who was just their friend, and they videoed it. I shouldn't be saying this on the main feed. Joanna will yell at me for saying this main feed, but they're not listening. At any rate, it was, I think, on balance, like a good reading. Joanna read a portion of George Saunders' great story, Sea Oak, it's just brutal and funny. And so that, it was great. I was, in general, I thought it was a great night. One of the people who spoke made a, just passing mention of her writing class. So she teaches in I don't know if it's an MFA or an undergrad writing program, or teaches in a creative writing program, and it was a very brief reference, but just described her workshop. All she said was this. She said she sometimes has her students do an exercise where one of them will read his own work aloud to the class, and the class will just raise a hand or say a word or make a gesture to pause the reading every time. I think the way she put it was, she said every time they bump on something, like every time something comes up that bothers them, that snags them, that catches that gets their attention, that they have a small objection to, or that troubles them slightly, or that rings a little funny in their ear. And then they stop and they discuss that. This idea, the idea that you would have a student writer read his work aloud and have the rest of the class sort of buzz in every time something snagged in their ear for whatever reason, and then provide feedback on what had caused that snag so that the author could modify his work accordingly. This idea rubbed me very much the wrong way. But I wanted to sort of think through what might be behind it. So I do something not totally dissimilar with my own writing, not initially, but sort of late in the game when I'm really doing sort of a final polish. I will do sort of read-throughs of work, and this is both poetry and prose, but especially poetry. I will read through the work and just try to, really let it strike my ear as a stranger, and I will stop when something catches in my ear. I do think it's a little bit different because it's my own ear. Like, even if I'm trying to hear it as a stranger, I'm still hearing it, as the work of a stranger with my own ear. And because I think I am listening primarily for what rings false, or what sounds forced or clumsy, or what doesn't sound effortless, really is what I'm chiefly listening for. What does not, because what I want is for the writing to sound effortless. It is not effortless. I don't want it to be effortless, but I do want it to sound effortless. And so that is chiefly what I am listening for when I do those sort of final polishes and I kind of internally perform the exercise this writing teacher was describing. But what I can imagine, if I try to play devil's advocate, if I try to imagine sort of what is the idea behind this exercise, it is, well, one, it might be that all of the other writers in the room, all the other student writers are offering that service to the author. They are offering the service of kind of identifying whenever something sounds false or forced or clumsy or effortful. But they are also presumably identifying anytime something snags their ear for another reason, right? Maybe it is boring. Maybe it is annoying. Maybe it's troublesome or bothersome or offensive for one reason or another. And the goal, presumably, is that the work be revised such that were it to be read aloud again to the same group, which stands in, for the larger population of people who read this sort of work. If you were to do the exercise again after revision, there would be either no more snags, right? Nobody would buzz in to object to anything, or they would buzz in only at moments that were sort of very specially chosen, deliberately to snag the reader's ear, or call the reader's attention to the work. So I think the best defense of that exercise is probably similar to the defense of sensitivity readers, right? Which is that it is literally giving a voice on a line by line basis to people who might not have been involved in the writing, to people who might have had a different experience or background to the people doing the writing, and so that the writer can benefit from some of the perspective of those whose experiences are different from his, right? Like that, I think, is probably the best defense both of this exercise and of sensitivity readers. My chief objection to sensitivity readers is that when you ask somebody to buzz in, when you ask somebody to identify passages that are insensitive, that is what they are going to do. Right? Like if you are asked to do this, you will do it. And if you're not prompted initially to do it, you will find an opportunity to do it. I also tend to think that unless somebody is really kind of in the boat with you, unless someone is really committed to your life or to the work or both, then just sort of drive-by feedback is highly suspect. I also think with this exercise, as with the sensitivity readers exercise, I'm not somebody who complains a lot about MFA writing. That's not something I say a whole lot, but I think those who do say it a lot would identify an exercise exactly like this as the root of the problem. That is, this exercise is, if anything, if ever you could theoretically conceive of an exercise in a writing workshop that would produce writing that was homogeneous, in which everybody's writing sounded increasingly the same and none of it offended anybody in the room, until everybody had the same sensibilities and everybody had the same ear and everybody had the same writing instincts, it would be an exercise such as this, right? This is an exercise for producing a consensus of taste and possibly a consensus of style. So I think that is, at best, unrelated to quality in writing, and at worst, contrary to the pursuit of good writing, and likely to sand off, along with anything objectionable, probably anything interesting out of from the work. So hearing that little anecdote during the reading, I was reminded of the interview I did a couple of weeks ago with Karan Kapoor and Shannon Mann, the editors of Only Poems, the single poetry publication I know of that was named after a porn site. Only Poems publishes, as the title suggests, poems. It does also publish, as you will hear in the interview, interviews, and the Only Poems newsletter publishes essays and other pieces on poetry publishing, and the whole world of poetry. Only Poems is also currently hosting its first ever poetry contest. So I will include links in the show notes to all of that, as well as to the work of Karan and Shannon, both of whom are poets themselves. They were such a lovely surprise. I mean, I was hopeful, but they just turned out to be extremely easygoing, very frank, very game and fun, and just really good sports, like really willing to jump in and play along. And they spoke very candidly about their work as editors, about everything that is wrong with poetry magazines and the poetry world, about their taste in poetry, about what they like, what they don't like, what they are trying to do differently with Only Poems and with their poetry contest. For one thing, they are big believers in transparency. So I hope you will enjoy this conversation. There is a whole other piece of it. At the end, I gave them a kind of a lightning round where I came up with a list of all of the problems that I thought frequently brought down good poetry magazines, and they responded to them in turn, one by one. So that lightning round is going to be on The Secret Show in the next week or two. But for now, please enjoy my conversation with Karan Kapoor and Shannon Mann of... Oh, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you are listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. If you cannot get enough SLEERICKETS on the main feed, you can go to sleerickets.substack.com to sign up for The Secret Show, where there is an extra episode every week, as well as 80 plus episodes in the backlog. There is some very juicy stuff in there. Go check it out. If you put in your email address, I will give you a week's access for free, and you can see what it's all about. After that, it is pretty fucking cheap. All right, now to my conversation with Karan Kapoor and Shannon Mann of Only Poems.
Yeah, we started it. Well, we we masterminded it in August of last year, pretty much overnight, because it was just, I guess, born out of this excitement to want to, I don't know, like to do, not necessarily to do more, because as parents and full-time students and writers, we did have a lot on our plate, but there was definitely an urge to do something different in connection to poetry. Specifically, the way that we read is very obsessive. So, when we find a poet we like, we want to find everything by them that we can. And you can't immediately get all their books. So, we kind of scour the internet, scour their website, and sometimes it can be hard to do that, find their interviews, etc. And we like, well, it would be a great way to create, to create a journal that would help feed people's obsessive, need to,
and also whatever, like for instance, if we there are a lot of journals that we love, but whatever we think is not really abundant in the poetry lit magazine world, I think we tried to kind of um, build Only Poems around that, so that we could offer what we don't see as often.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Like an example of that would, for example, be like we get some interesting emails about this one. It's like we have published a lot of sex positive poems,
Okay.
and apparently that's just not a thing in lit mags. It's go figure. Editors seem to be sex shy, so we have, and it wasn't like we said. Of course, the name is Only Poems, and yes, it
Right.
derives from OnlyFans. But we didn't set out to be
Oh,
like
God,
this.
I hadn't thought about it in those
Yeah,
terms. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
This is gonna be a sex positive poetry magazine, but just
Right.
the poems that we read, they were like they spoke very
openly.
very openly. I was gonna say explicitly, but that's the wrong word. Very openly and very vulnerably about sex and sexuality. So we've published several authors that deal with it, and we've gotten really really good responses, and also the odd like very interesting responses where people are like, what would young people who are surfing the net for poetry think about this? It's like, well, yeah.
You don't know what
Have
young
you met
people.
young people? They like
Yeah.
sex.
People surfing the net for poetry. I mean, we don't want to alienate readers, but
Right.
for the most part, the response we've gotten has been positive about that. So that's a direct example of kind of platforming poetry that
Yeah,
we
when I was saying that we wanted to do something quote unquote different, when what I meant was that first off, you usually pick up an issue of a magazine, you see that there is a poem or two by a poet, and then there are like, I don't know, say 30 poets or 20 poets in an issue, and each one gets like a page or two.
Yeah.
So we also sometimes feel that journals, I mean, we kept asking who really we get our contributor copies, and I'm like, I don't think anybody's reading this because
Yeah.
I don't know. So I'm usually suspicious of people, and then and I speak this. I'm gonna speak this for myself, but I also see that it happens everywhere. Like for instance, I receive my contributor's copy, and I'll get excited. I'm like, oh, this is pretty, and I'm gonna open it, like flip through it and open it to my poem or whatever, and then click a picture of it, put it on social media, and that's the end of it, really. Like I'm like, I'm not gonna sit and read through like a literary magazine. It's rarely that we do that actually, but I imagine like in the real world, like by numbers, it's very hard for me to imagine that a lot of people do actually read magazines, or you know so we also want that's also why we published like a poet a week, so that the poet actually gets some attention. And you can we also publish about, like, we started with the idea that we'll publish from 3 to 7 poems, but lately I think the past 6 or 7 weeks we have only published like 10 poems by everybody.
yeah 10 poems of a poet.
And then also we like the interviews have been very wonderful, like the conversations that we've had with these poets, they've just been so nice and so intellectually invigorating.
Yeah.
So it's been very nice that way to be able to engage with somebody's mind so closely.
I'm always of two minds about these things, because on the one hand, like, the only criterion that matters is, well, why don't we just publish good things? So like you want it to be good. And of course you can always say, well, we publish, the stuff in our magazine is the good stuff. But you are, I think, like, part of what always makes me a little skeptical of poetry magazines and poetry endeavors is that there is so much bad faith in the poetry world. And that exactly what you're talking about, where, you get a contributor's copy. And I mean, my joke is like, you could really just print the table of contents and the rest could be blank, and nobody would like, like all you read is the table of contents to see who's in this issue. And
that is so true.
Right. And then maybe you take a picture of your one poem or whatever. So you are, part of what you want is actually to publish good things, but you're also structuring how the magazine works in a different way. And that, you've mentioned the poem of the week, but what, like, from scratch, if someone is encountering only poems and is comparing it with Kenyon Review or like either a print or an online poetry magazine, what is the difference, just structurally speaking? What are you getting that is different when you go to only poems?
I think aesthetic is such a big part of it. There are some print magazines that we really love, and we think that like they do a really good job of like making it appear very aesthetic.
Yeah.
But some of these magazines have horrible websites.
Yeah, they look like shit. Yeah.
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 I'm glad you said that.
A lot do. Yeah.
And first they look like shit. Second, they're so hard to maneuver. Third, they're not reader friendly. They're just it's So that was when we started. I think that was the biggest thing that we wanted to care about. Shannon here is like, we are obsessive with everything. So, and aesthetic is one of those.
Yeah, I think one other thing was to kind of subvert the idea of what you so internet culture is very fast. Everything, we always joke like it's just, a scrolling culture going fast. So kind of subverting that, and like, maybe it like might well have failed. It didn't. So that's telling you something. But like, here's 10 poems by one person.
Okay.
Like read 10 poems, not just one poem, like, and then another poem, and then another, like by like different people, but just 10 poems, one person plus a long as interview.
Yeah.
Okay.
And people,
So
when you go like for each week, you don't have like an issue where you have stacks of stuff in a table. It's like what Only Poems puts out is each week at a time, you get one poet, 10 poems or so from that poet, and then a long interview with that one poet.
Yes.
And then we promote them. Okay. Yes. We promote them throughout the week. And we also promote them later. So that's another thing we noticed is that, for example, with us, we get published in magazines and it's really thrilling. It's exciting. It's fun, especially if it's a magazine we've been kind of coveting for a while. And then, sometimes beyond the print, there'll be like a social media post, which is cool. But then after that, it's like nothing. And then like you might
you never hear back from people.
And then editors change, things change, and it's like nothing at all. So we wanted to change that as well. Like if we tell our poets and we follow up with them, like if you have work coming up, please share. We want to share it. We want to continue to share it. If you have books coming out, let's work together to promote them.
And not only just asking out, but also like asking them, but also just be on the lookout yourself for their work.
Yes.
Yeah, like the onus, I think over the last, I don't know, decade or 2 decades, the idea of literary citizen has been so popularized, and I think it's kind of problematic. What publishers and these magazine editors have done is put the onus of promotion of the writer's work on the writer. We truly don't believe that it should be the case. We, as writers ourselves, as poets ourselves, we know how shy we are when it comes to promoting our own work. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know, it seems so weird to kind of, share your own work.
I think it should be the publisher's responsibility.
Yeah.
Of course, the writer can do it. It's not like you don't promote your stuff. No, you can, of course.
Yeah.
But I think it should the onus should be on the publisher, whether that's the literary magazine, and even more so a press. But that's, I guess, a whole different.
We've always been clear. We've never asked our writers to share even our social media posts that are about them. I mean, if they want to, they can. We don't even say that if you want, you can. If you don't, it's okay. We just don't make a point of it because we don't believe that it should be their responsibility in any way. So
you brought up the term literary citizen, or I've heard good citizenship, good literary citizenship. What you said, it's a term that's come up a lot in the last year or so, but it's also, you have some objections to it. Just introduce that for somebody who might not have heard the term literary citizen. What are we talking about?
Yeah. Okay. Well, you can even break it down as a citizen. When you think of a citizen, you think of, okay, what makes a good upstanding citizen? Maybe it's somebody who volunteers. Maybe it's somebody, who says hello. Whenever they go to like a local place, it's somebody who's kind of in the know. If it's a mom, maybe they're on like
somebody who supports literary small local businesses.
So somebody who's there, who's present, and like that takes energy and time and privilege, like that somebody has to be someone who probably doesn't have a full-time job, or if they do, they can somehow afford to do all of this and be in all of these places. And even if they don't have the privilege of time or money, then they are spending a lot of energy, doing all of these things, and alongside, doing whatever their personal life demands. So literary citizen, this term has kind of become, and I mean, like all terms, you can kind of view it from a problematic lens, or you can view it from well, this is what it's supposed to be. But somebody who isn't just there to do their own shit, but they're there to kind of really take part in the literary community. So champion other writers, connect with older writers, connect with younger writers, do endeavors that are connected or adjacent to poetry. But as you can see, like while I say this, it really just fizzles out. Like a real foundational meaning truly fizzles out. And at the end of the day, it almost becomes like a popularity contest. Like whose name have you heard of the most?
Right.
You know, and why have you heard of their name the most? Is it because their work is truly quote unquote objectively the best, or because they're just at all the parties? Yeah. Yeah.
Right. No, like it's being a good citizen, like just like being the person who's on all the committees and runs the PTA and just sort of likes to pull the strings.
Yeah. Imagine an immigrant, like imagine us. I mean, if we are like living on meager stipends, say for MFAs or whatever, and then how would you expect somebody like that to kind of buy all these magazines or whatever?
That's the other thing. Yeah, like magazines will often say like, please read our work, get the languages, you know, try and get familiar with what we publish before you submit to us. Like
read at least one issue before you submit.
Paywalls, or like buy it for $12.
Right. Like, but it's also insane. Like if you want to submit with any kind of like in the quantity that it takes to get published anywhere, if you then read every single magazine you're submitting to, that's insane. That's like it's
impossible.
Right. Like one of those exponential problems.
Yes.
So this was another kind of at the back of our heads. Like we were like, we're not going to be able to be editors for magazines. Like it's not going to happen. It's like, what's like, I mean, no, we don't really want to say it out loud, but it's like, all the editors are white women. It's like, look at me. Are you white? Am I? No, I mean, it's just, that's just where we are at. So it's like, well, let's just make a magazine that we edit. And then that's the way that, you know, we could try to approach this idea of a literary citizen. But as we have done that, we have seen the kind of flaws, not necessarily flaws, but the kind of holes in that idea, in that veneer, because it takes a lot of work to show up and to also then along that practice your own writing. I mean, it's really hard.
There's a question, and it's come up a few times on the podcast, and people have a lot of disagreement about it, but it feels to me maybe related to the literary citizen question, which is the term, I don't know if you've heard the expression like good for poetry or bad for poetry. Like when people there is an argument that comes up sometimes that if you're going to talk about poetry at all, particularly among people who are not poets, you should always only be boosting and supporting and praising poetry because it's good for poetry. You don't want to do anything that's bad for poetry. My concern is that also, like, if you listen to somebody who's only trying to say things that are good for poetry for very long, it's very difficult to trust that person. If you read a lot of, because one of the other problems, like one of the other sources of bad faith in the poetry world, by my lights, is that so much published poetry is no good, is garbage. And so then if all of it's just being praised all the time, it becomes hard to trust any of that.
I stand precisely where you stand on this as well. Right. Because we think about this a lot too. The idea of the poet critic has disappeared in the last, I don't know, 2 decades or so more, but also from before, I imagine. Like Octavio Paz, T.S. Eliot, who used to be poets, but also really good, strong, very well thought critics.
Reynolds Durrell, brutal.
We never, and I do understand the other side of the argument that, you know, why waste time writing negative reviews? Is there value in, like, you know, people anyway don't read poetry, so why do you want to shit on, I don't know, Rupi Kaur or whatever? And people shit on Rupi Kaur all the time, but I'm talking about other poets too who are kind of popular but write bad books, or, you know, are still praised for it. But that's what I think, that if you keep I mean, I see that in my classes too. You go to a workshop, and if there's a person who just praises every poem, and even poems that are clearly bad, then I don't trust that person. I mean, because if they praise my poem too, then I'm like, oh, well, I don't think you know what a good poem is. So even if you say good things about it, it really doesn't mean much, you know. So that sort of thing.
Yeah, one way that that we've tried to so this connects to another aspect of only poems, is we want to make it transparent, because sometimes you read a poem in a lit mag, you're like, why the fuck did they pick that poem?
Right. Yeah.
I don't get it. So we started doing like a poem of the month feature, where we have a different theme, and then the poem that wins that, you know, mini award, we also say why we picked it exactly. Like, this is what stood out. This is what we liked. This is why it's being published here, just to make that more transparent. And of course, opinions vary, but then you get an idea of, who's reading your stuff and why they're picking it. And that's another thing. Often you don't know who you're submitting to when you submit to Lit Mags. You might think that you're sending to Kevin Young, but really you're probably sending to like the 300 readers or whatever there are that guard the New York, or who knows.
Right.
So
the
just
angry
kind of,
intern of the week.
yeah. So just kind of, I mean, making clear, like, poetry is personal, and this is what this person likes. You want to get published here, this is what we like.
I just want to, that's very accurate. But I want to go back to what you were saying, Matthew. I would like to ask you the same question. What do you think? Do you think negative reviews have value?
Yeah, I mean, I have mixed feelings about it. I tend to think that though he is a reviewer I often disagree with, I think William Logan's general philosophy on this question is a good one, which is if it's somebody who's new, who's young, first book, young, then there's no point in writing a bad review of that person, because you're never going to hear that book about that book anyway. When he goes after somebody and he writes some very harsh reviews, they are consistently people who are very celebrated, very well, published and so forth.
This is what I like too. This is how I think as well, that if, like, so for instance, I mean, I like this poet, Maggie Smith, but I hated her memoir. I hated it. I just absolutely
She wrote Good Bones, which she got famous for, and then she wrote some other things.
Well, that's a wonderful poem, and everybody loves it. But the memoir, I just hated it. I was like, fuck, this is so, I mean, I felt very strongly for it. And I've never before felt that, negative. But since after reading that, I want to kind of write about it. I haven't, of course, I don't have that kind of time, but it's just, I keep thinking why I want to do that. And it's not because just I'm angry or I want to shit on it or whatever, but also because I think that's the service that we do when we write a negative review to the lit world or whatever, is that first, the same thing that you were speaking about, that if you praise everything, then praise loses its meaning, and nothing is good and nothing is bad after that. And then also, so many people who are like praising it, maybe some of them would perhaps change their minds or think why they're praising it, or just to bring,
or they'll quietly write you a private message saying, I agree, but I'm not going to say that in public.
And that happens a lot too, right?
I think also, it kind of, even if you don't think of it as negative and positive, but kind of moving away from the binaries of this is really good because it's famous.
Yes.
Right.
Just kind of moving and just kind of opening up the conversation. Because, people can be very, it can be, and that's kind of what our interviews do as well. We try to kind of open up that binary, and like try to look into the like, we ask our poets who they like, who they read, and then we try to probe more difficult questions. And that's, again, just kind of opening up that very binary way of thinking of what's good, what's bad. And like, for example, interviews had gotten to a point where even with writers, where it was like, what do you like to wear? It's like, they're fucking writers. They probably just sit in there, I don't know. Or like pajamas all day. It doesn't matter what they wear.
This was the funny thing to us. Like, we checked out some interviews, and although of course there are many places who do great interviews, but we saw some that were so funny to us. What do you eat for breakfast, or like, what do you like to wear when you're writing? How does your table look like, etc. I'm like, well, this poet is not exactly Taylor Swift or something, nobody cares. So like, ask them real questions. This is such a good opportunity.
I think we were just watching an interview with Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin, and that
is an interview.
It's on YouTube. It's an hour long, and it's
it's 2 hours.
Nikki Giovanni is just like going for it,
and she's so young, and like
from the very beginning. It's like, wow, I like that would be an amazing interview to do with someone. And so, like, talking about the negative and the positive, she's being critical, but she's not criticizing.
Which is also what I wanted to go back to, like, as opposed to reviews being about praise or like just shitting on something, to be like actually critical and observationally so.
Just make that distinction if you would. What is
Oh,
the difference
yes,
between
yes.
being critical and criticizing?
You want to do that?
I think one kind of very simple way to do it is that it's not personal. You're not attacking somebody's
right,
person.
Yeah, right.
You're trying, they've put out a work, and because they put it out, it's now become something separate from them.
Yeah.
At least it ought to be. And this again can go into a whole other can of worms, art and artist, etc. But I do think if you put it out of yourself, it's no longer in a journal, it's now been printed, it's got its own, ISBN number, then it's its own thing. And therefore it ought to be critiqued, because critiquing something, whether that brings out feelings that can be considered negative or feelings that can be considered positive, will benefit not just the person doing it, but even more the people reading it, because it gets you thinking more deeply about not just what's that specific book, but writing, poetry, art in general. And then you begin to make so many different connections as you read.
And the other side of the coin is the same too. Like in terms of praise too, you can be critical with your praise as opposed to just saying. So for instance, we see so many books with on the cover it says brilliant by, say, I don't know, I don't want to name names who I love, so I would refrain. But so say brilliant or dazzling, etc. These are the buzzwords that people use on the covers of books, and of course we understand why that happens. I'd be more than happy to have that on my book's cover.
You wouldn't turn it down. But,
yeah, exactly.
And it makes sense for mass market,
right,
for someone to pick it
up. But to praise, one of my professors used to say, you cannot really praise without being critical, because for instance, I see sometimes in workshops again that happens that somebody will like, oh, this is so good, and they say, and that person will probably say to everybody, yeah, what do you mean? Like, how do you define good? What's your parameters?
Yes, yeah. For example, often when I see praise in reviews, whether that's for poetry collections or for books, it'll praise the story, the plot, and that's an easy thing to praise. In a way, I could praise almost any plot. Even like sometimes the worst movies have the best plots because they're so funny and they're so ridiculous. But like, tell me what the person is doing with their craft. How is that dazzling? Instead of how is the poet and their personality dazzling?
And the blurbs all read the same.
Yeah.
Oh, blurbs are nonsense. It's placebo text. Yeah, it's just there to fill space.
I mean,
placebo. That's a cool.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. For example, like Marquez's Forbidden Book is coming out, or maybe it's already come out, that he specifically said,
but he did not want it published, I thought.
Yeah, I think he even wanted to burn it, and now it's coming out because of course it is. And like, I'd be surprised to find, I mean, like a fully critical or bad review, because in a way people would think that, oh, then I'm not going to be the first one to shit on Marquez, or you.
So another opportunity for bad faith that I encounter frequently in looking at literary magazines is what you referred to earlier, which is the guidelines for writers. So what are you looking for? What do you like? And the almost universal answer, as Alexis Sears has pointed out, is like, oh, well, we don't discriminate. We like poems of all kinds. We just want the best work. Occasionally you'll see like a nice guide where they'll say like, no cat poems, no grandmother poems. You'll see, which I appreciate that kind of honesty, but what you're acknowledging is that you do have tastes, or taste between the two of you. There are things you like and don't like. What is it what do poems that you like or that you publish have in common? What do they not? What qualities do they exclude? Are not represented there?
I love that question. We ask this question to each other all the time because it's such a mystifying process too. I'm so intuitive with it. I'm such a critical reader. I just look at it and sometimes I know that this is not good. Most often, a no is the easiest. Like for instance, I know that this is not gonna work. It's just there's the poems that have been worked on over and over. They just appear differently on the page is all. That's the best way I can put it.
We've tried to make it easy also in a way that we've tried to put, we have a pretty good list of poets that we like. So that I think would give a good vibe check.
I don't know if I've seen, is it on the submission page? I'm trying to find.
Yes. It's on the submit page, and it's got
a lot of people in in their cover letters mention one of those or few of those writers that you
Yes.
have this favorite writer. These are my favorite writers too. And it's always nice to kind of see that people resonate with the writers that we resonate with.
Yes.
We love prose poems. We love formal poems, ghazals, villanelles. They're all
that's the other thing. Often you form poems, especially poems that don't actually experiment with the form, but they stay true to the form. It can be difficult to see those in modern, like, literary magazines. But we specifically say, we like those. Send us your, true to form poems.
Like it doesn't have to just like explode the form in order to use it. You don't mind if it's just following the form. Okay, all right. Well, that'll be good news to some of my listeners.
Yeah, we actually appreciate when
when someone uses form well.
We love narrative poems that do minimal lyric.
And we love long poems. Long poems are rare to see in literary magazines because, again, it's like literary real estate. It's
some magazines do a good job of it, and I really like it when they do. But you see, it's getting rarer and rarer because I imagine our attention span.
But like our last poem of the month, that was interesting because it was like up between two. The theme was love and sex. One poem, it was just, I think, 10 lines. It was very beautiful. The other poem was 15 pages. And it was almost like a play.
So those were our two.
Those are our top two. And it was like, this is getting hard. And it's like, he's like, no, I'm really strongly leaning towards a 15-page poem, not because it's 15 pages, but because it's a fantastic poem.
Yeah, it was so.
But also it goes against, again, the idea of just flipping and just going through. Like, maybe way less people will read it.
Yeah.
But the people who do will be transformed.
Our goal is that, that you there's some stillness that is induced in you when you come to our website in some way, that you stay and that you want to come back also, but you also want to spend some time with it and not just like scroll through it. And we get so many wonderful messages from readers, and it's always nice to be acknowledged that way, that just to know that it is happening, that people are staying, people are stopping, people are making this a part of their practice. So many people say that every Sunday, because we send our newsletter, like we change our poet every Sunday, we announce our poet of the week every Sunday. So some people say that every Sunday I spend like an hour or two in the morning doing this, reading the interviews that you publish and reading the poems and just spending my time with that poet and that voice. And it's always very nice to see that what we envisioned is kind of coming true, and it's very nice that way.
No, I mean that's wonderful to hear, and it does sound like you've had some real success with it. I do want to press a little bit on the question of what you like and don't like, because I'm not totally sure that I got a clear sense. It sounds like you are open to a variety of forms, but are there things that you said you want a poem in your magazine to induce stillness in the reader? What do you try to help me out with, like, what is it that you want it to do, or what things are you sick of and don't want at all?
Not really sick of anything, but I've realized over the last 6 months that we've published that we don't want poems to be too abstract. We like stories, we like narrative
where it's clear
what is happening,
and if it's not clear, then it's intentional and it's short-lived. Like if you're using mystery in your poem, then like at some point I want to know why I care about your mystery.
We like poems that can be touched, and that
also this is probably the MFA effect. We are MFA poets, but what I notice is often people will use vocabulary to mask craft. So like they'll use this, I notice a lot. This is very specific, but I notice it so much. They'll use like complicated plant names in poems.
That's the best.
Like a lot of them. And they're beautiful to read, but it's like, I'm not taking a botany class. Like, I don't care.
When you try to, use vocabulary to mask the lack of substance, in a poem. So for instance, the last week we published one of my favorite poets of all time, Andrea Cohen.
I was just reading the interview.
And I love her work, and I always have, and her poems are like these pithy, short, in another life I want this one. That's the poem. So it's not one could argue that that's not a poem even, or one could say that
it's like this painting you see and it's like, I could have painted this, but you didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like that. Yeah, that's pretty accurate too. So, poems that can move you, poems that, do something in your head, that poems
make
that
you feel something.
Think, so even those 3 lines, which are like 5 words, they make you stop, right? They make you stop and think, okay, what is happening here? That is so true. It rings true. And a person who came from far away, whose English is second language, even for me or for somebody who's living far away, that poem would, I imagine, ring true. But on the other hand, if that poem is, I don't know, talking about azaleas or lapis lazuli, whatever,
Lapis lazuli is a big one. That's not a plant, but that's a poets like that word. Azaleas, you mentioned.
Azaleas
poets like azaleas. I've never seen an azalea
in my life.
Yeah, the two that I notice all the time are arabesque and scrim.
Arabesque, yes.
Yeah, mostly people who have no experience in either dance or theater, so they've never actually encountered either of these things. But
yes.
So it's good too. It's always so refreshing. So the poets we published lately as well, the younger poets who have not published as much as one that has not published ever before, we realize that their voice has something so captivating that they are not kind of afraid to just be themselves. They're not trying to sound like somebody else. So you hear this a lot too, I guess, with voice and everything, but it does, I think it does ring true still.
You're specifically talking of Francis, and he's mainly a photographer. So it's always interesting to see when people from other professions, like other main professions, when they write poetry, it's like, wow, that I didn't know poetry could still do this, could make this feeling of, I can't believe somebody's written this. So that is something we also look for, and we really encourage new writers.
We also realize that people from elsewhere, people who are not too influenced by the American aesthetic, also can be very interesting. We published a poet from, like, a Polish poet, and her work was just amazing. And then we published a German poet from Germany who has written 3 novels, but all in German, and published her first poems with us, and they were just mind-blowing.
Are these in translation, or are they translated by the author, or
they are translated by the author, or written in English by the author? So that has also been very interesting to us to see an aesthetic.
That's interesting you brought up about the American thing. That wasn't something that we consciously cultivated, but after a point we're like, this is something that's important to see, like poetry that's not expressly American, or not just expressly American.
And of course, it's a generalization too, that all American poetry is alike. It's not, of course. Most poets we love are actually American poets, but there is a kind of similarity that runs through most, when we we know in our heads what we mean when we say
diners usually come up.
Diners,
baseball.
Diners, baseball. Cowboys, guns. All right.
Guns.
It's more interesting to see when you see like poems in the submission queue, and it's like, that's who you're emulating. Interesting. It's like,
How would you characterize, you referred to MFA poetry. I have an MFA in poetry. It sounds like you two are either working on one, or you
working on one. Yeah.
Right. So what does that mean then to you? What smacks of MFA poetry in just a slush pile submission?
I think for me, 2 things. One is something that looks like it's been overly tended. It's like just like somebody's really, just kind of gone to town on it, and it's so precise, and it's almost,
and the person has disappeared.
Like that. That essential softness, the feeling has disappeared. Like,
for instance, when I read a poem by Matthew, I want to see you in the poem, right? Like, because
if it's some person,
because if it's a poem anybody else could write, then I'd rather read. I mean, maybe that person could do a better job, so I read their poem. So, for instance, the poet we were speaking about, Frances, or Kaylee, who we just published as well, her poems are poems that nobody else could write.
I can imagine if those poems go to a workshop, they would be like, okay, take out all the adverbs first. We don't want any ly words. Secondly, why are your stanzas so weird? Put them in like couplets.
Add more images.
You know,
There's no
why is
image.
one line this long? Why is this just about you feeling sad? Wait a minute, you literally wrote, I feel sad.
So I guess what,
You know, like,
I guess what happens is that when you try to not serve the work, but an idea that you have about poetry, that a poem should look like this, when people do that in workshop, I think it's a problem. But I do think that now more and more workshops are getting better.
Yeah.
They are becoming places where people are recognizing that we are here to serve the work, not our own aesthetic choices. So we also try to do that when we provide our editorial feedback as well. If there are certain aesthetics that we do not really resonate with, but still see good in the poem, then we would try to serve the poem itself as opposed to our own aesthetic.
That's also why we put value in cover letters, that we ask people to specifically, if they want to, they can write a longer cover letter and tell us about themselves more. And a lot of people will. Some people will say they just want the poems to stand on themselves, and that's also totally fine.
So I want to ask you about that, because when I read slush pile submissions, I make a point of ignoring the cover letter in the bio and reading the poems before I go back and look. But I'm curious, what do you like about cover letters? What's the value you take from them?
Oh, we also read the poems before, and we only read the cover letters of people who we think, whose poems we want to consider.
Sure.
So there's certainly that, but the way we want to kind of deal with the way we engage with our poets is not just very professionally or coldly. I think we are very personal. We want to know the people we're publishing, and we want to kind of be in touch with them. We want to make friends with them.
Yeah, one of our taglines is we publish poets, not poems. And then one person was like, why are you called Only Poems? You should be called Only Poets. It's like,
that was a good point.
It was, but it's like Only Poems just has a better ring to it.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just more poetic.
But yeah, that's what I was saying was, sometimes, like, going back to what we were speaking about earlier, how we have been published in, like, I don't know, 100 places, but are friends with only 1 or 2 editors, and we cherish those relationships. But where are the rest of the 98 people who published us, and we don't even remember the names of, or they don't remember our names?
I have like one good example is Bill from Agni had an hour and a half Zoom conversation with Karan about the spacing of his poem and print.
And I was so touched by that. I was like, this is the kind of editor I want to be.
He's like the main editor of Agni. He's not like you know.
Yeah. So the head editor of a really big magazine is talking to me about just the spacing of my poem. Is just so obsessive. It's just so obsessive, and did it like 3 times over the weeks, and like was just so good with his editorial eye. And I appreciated that so much. I was like, wow, this is the kind of care and attention I'd want to give to anybody that I'd like, that I want to publish. So, and just even beyond that, that was like still more professional. I want to kind of, so the cover letter tells us who the person is in like a little way. We want to pick up on that. We want to ask more questions to the poet we're publishing. We want to kind of build a relationship of sorts, because we would want to publish them again. We want to promote their work. Their books are going to come out. We're going to write reviews for them, so just, we don't want to abandon anybody. So I guess
so that because it seems like there may be two questions. One is like a technical perfectionism, and part of me, like, as a writer, I think like, oh, what a generous and thoughtful editor. And then as an editor, I think like, Jesus, you got how many people are publishing? You don't have that much time. What are you doing?
That's what we were struggling. I write to like, I don't know, 20 people a day or something.
You don't have an hour and a half conversation with 20 people a day. There aren't that many hours.
Yeah, exactly.
And, it is interesting, but like, I think you kind of begin to develop a bit of rhythm. Some people naturally do want to open up more.
Some people
doesn't want to stay guarded, and that's fine. We're not like, if you publish with us,
you have to be
we'll be friends
join the
with
cult
forever.
Yeah. There are actually people we have abandoned, like a few of that sounds funny. Like, there have been poets who well,
some of them are just too big. Like, for example, I mean, I don't think they would listen to this, but if they do, hi, love you. For example, like Ray Armantrout, like,
But she's very nice to me on emails. But yeah, I imagine, I mean, I myself would feel, shy reaching out to her, like, more often, because like, too old, too big,
Yeah.
too big a name.
Yeah.
So there's of course that, but we just love our poets.
For example, Kaylee, you were like, soon she's gonna be the one who'll be winning all the awards.
And I
So, like,
truly
that
believe
feeling of like, like
truly believing in
we
somebody.
really believe this person is gonna be like the next big name. And like that's not the reason that we're trying to like, get cozy with them, but it's just so cool to create this community of people who are...
If we were a press, we would more than happily publish this person's book and so many others.
Yeah.
And I hope we can be a press someday, so we can.
And because you just now opened up your first big contest. That's right. And I read a whole thing you wrote, Shannon, about doing it in a I have a lot of experience with shitty and sometimes crooked and sometimes, I won a prize that then collapsed shortly afterward. Yeah. So it's a book prize. So they took submission fees from this was the Richard Wilbur Award. They took submission fees from everybody, awarded my book the prize, but then they collapsed, never gave me the money, so they ran away with the money. And so
they didn't even publish the book.
No, didn't publish the book. At this point, I'm glad they didn't, because but
of course,
but I mean, that was a particularly bad instance, but I've had a lot of experience with varying degrees of proximity to book prizes, and my experience is they are, even when they have the best of intentions, they are seldom run in quite a transparent, quite a perfectly honest way.
People are guarded about money, right? So it's like, people are like,
so identify, because I did really, really appreciate your essay, and that was one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you. Would identify for the listeners, if you would, like, what is wrong with poetry contests, and what are you doing to not fuck that up?
Yeah, I hope we're doing something not fuck that up. I think we are. One major thing is that they're very expensive. They've gotten more and more expensive. It's what you can...
There are places that charge £15 for like a poem.
Yeah.
And then as many poems you want to submit, you can.
Most common is 25. I think most common in the US is $25
for 3 poems.
For 3 to 5 poems. I was like, okay, like, sure. But then like if you like submit to like 3 or 4 prizes. Okay, so I do our submissions for both of us to LitMags. This is general submissions. Yeah. So I think I submitted about to 60 places. 55 of them cost a minimum $3.
And some of them 5, 7.
And some of them 5 or more. So it's like,
you spend a fortune
just on general submissions. Yeah. So like, even general submissions
and
now cost
some of those magazines that charge submissions don't even pay.
Yeah.
Oh God, yeah. Right. Yeah.
And then then you've got the prize, and then you usually have like a like $1,000, $2,000, whatever, like a big prize, and it can essentially be like entering a lottery. Some of them will give you a subscription.
It kind of is, it is, in a way, it is. It's chance,
but like a rigged lottery.
Yes, yeah. So then they'll sometimes give you a subscription. It's like, sure, I want a subscription to I don't know, whatever review.
Copper Nickel is the one I always end up with a subscription to, and I can't remember how I got it.
Yeah, go on my table, but thanks for that. I guess it's free. Not really. So one thing that we did was we slashed the cost. We made it clear that this is to help us fund the magazine. Like, we need this money to help us fund the magazine. This is why we're running the contest. That, I think, even though it's a simple thing, that was clear. We also make it clear that while, right now we don't pay the editors, we don't pay our staff, that it would be nice for us to get to a point where we can pay a stipend. So that's another thing that we made clear. So we slashed the cost, $15, and then we and then we thought, it still feels mean somehow to do this. But then it's like, hey, wait a minute, we run a Substack in which, we offer paid subscriptions, and we offer a lot of value in that Substack because, I guess we do, because we have paid subscribers. So a monthly subscription is $7, and that subscription comes with a bunch of stuff. One of them, starting next month, will be a free monthly feedback, as well as some really nice research articles around MFAs and other things. So it's like, okay, $7 for a month, $14 for 2 months, $15 fee. Let's give everybody a Substack comp for 2 months. Then they're getting something so they're not getting, just free advertising from us, because really when you give somebody a free magazine subscription, what you're giving is free personal like somebody will get your name in their face for a year, thanks, because they pay $25.
Yep.
So instead, they'll get our name in their face, but also
Right.
they'll get some really valuable stuff out of it. So in a way, the contest is $1. Yes, you pay $15, and then you get the comp alongside it. So that was one important way to make it
cheap.
Yeah. And then we have like a big prize, and we were clear, like, yeah, it's a big prize because that grabs attention. That's just, again, we were clear about that. And then we have 2 runner-ups. We went back and forth on all of these details so much because that's, I mean, so one thing is we're not a nonprofit. We don't ever intend to be one, because a nonprofit game is also very rigged.
Because most magazines who do that, and they don't really make I think, so especially print magazines, they spend a fortune on printing, and I don't think $25, even if they get like 1,000 submissions or whatever, and they make like, I don't know, $30,000 from their contests, I don't think they're actually profiting it or using that money. I think they're doing it in good faith, all of it. And
most of them
contests have long been like a way to fund the magazine. But just the model is kind of like,
just because it's in good faith doesn't mean it's smart.
Exactly.
I mean, a lot of it's subsidized by universities too, so
that's exactly what I was going to come to. It's mostly done by universities back.
Unless you're Gettysburg Review this year.
I've heard questionable things about Gettysburg that I don't not substantial enough to repeat on mic.
But I was going to come to that too, that most of it is like actually funded by universities
or really rich people.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. Which can be a double-edged sword. So like an example of a magazine I respect is Rattle. I will say, I've said before, I have different taste. I tend not to like a lot of the things they publish, but what I respect about them is that Tim Green is just publishing what he thinks is good, and like it's not like that's genuine. It's mostly people that you've never heard of, and he's not affiliated with the university. He doesn't give a fuck about what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what's hip, what's not. So I respect that. I appreciate it. It looks a little bit homegrown. It feels a little bit homegrown. It smells a little bit homegrown. It's not my favorite to read, but I respect sort of as a project what they're doing there. You seem to have in some ways a similar ethos, but you are also hip, which I'm then it makes me curious and almost suspicious. Like, well, what's going on?
What is happening?
We love what Tim does, and we also quite like the model that Rattle.
He's the reason we met. Actually.
Oh, you two met?
Yeah, I guess in some way.
Online, like the first poem that Cutter Never submitted was an ekphrastic challenge response to Rattle's May 2021 thing.
Okay,
that was the first month that I ever subscribed to a poetry newsletter. That poetry newsletter was Rattle. Got his poem, really loved it. Reached out to him. Thought he'd probably be like an 80-year-old man. He wasn't. And that's how we actually got.
Oh man, well done, Tim.
Yes.
Yeah. But we've spoken to him a lot when we started our magazine as well.
Because they have the podcast and the newsletter that accompanies the magazine. Like you have your newsletter.
And they also did kind of like right now they pay $200 per poem. But at one point they were paying, like they started out paying $25, then went to $50. They've been around for about 10, 20 years. Another magazine that's really good is Smoke Long Quarterly. These two magazines, I think, are something that, originally we thought that these would be good models to base off only poems, because they're the ones who've really been successful outside of university support. But now we are trying to, again, because they're both nonprofit, I believe. We tried to go nonprofit, and it's just not possible without.
Neither of us is a citizen here, so
that's one thing, but also we don't you need rich backing, or you need university backing. You need some kind of. But also it just feels dishonest in some way. Like, some nonprofit literary places, they make like millions of dollars a year. And it's like somehow they all get caught, like they're all gone with.
They're all able to spend that $1 million as well.
Right. They spend $1 million, so they have big salaries, or they do they reinvest.
And they're always in loss.
And then there's just this mentality that writers and writers should we should just give our work.
They should starve.
Right. Writers should be paid. Editors should be paid. Like, there's money in publishing, somehow it's just not here. It's just in like the top whatever 5%, but like book sales haven't gone down. They've only gone up. People are actually reading more and more and more. And people are coming back to long form content, even if it's slower to print content.
Yeah, we do believe that. We don't want to publish a magazine that people don't read or that only contributors read and like their 5 friends or whatever. We really want people who don't even generally read poetry to read our poems. I think that's also what Tim does well, because I think he's
they've got a big subscriber base.
He's made poetry very, very accessible to people who don't generally even read poetry.
Yeah.
I think our poetry, like you said, is more hip in some way because
the vibe.
It's like kind of
might just be because we're younger.
Yeah, it might be it. Yeah.
It's kind of more
immigrants.
And it sounded like, Karan, like you said, Shannon, you have a design background, or are you involved in the design? Are you?
I am, just because we can't pay for a designer. I am the de facto designer. Okay. So like there's been a lot of learning on the job. Right. He's got a better aesthetic eye. I've got a better technical hand. So then that kind of So then they pair well together. Yeah. He'll kind of tell me what he's envisioning, and
I'm like a director.
Yeah.
And Shannon is Shannon is the
I guess.
No, Shannon is actually the maker.
Yeah, but so like with this contest part, we wanted to be transparent. We want to continue to be transparent.
It's actually true too that we have each other to do this, because if it was just Shannon, I think it would not be possible. No. Just me, it would certainly not be possible.
Yeah.
We are good at different things, and I think they pair well together in a lot of ways.
And it seems like it would be tough if you were not married, or you didn't know, like you didn't have the connection that you have. Like it seems like some of what makes this all work is that the two of you are able to communicate as intuitively as you can.
Yes, I think that's also what helped it grow so quickly, is because we weren't a team of 10 or 15 or God forbid 100. Like sometimes it's like 50 readers.
Sometimes you'd go to like a masthead of some magazine. It's endless. You keep scrolling through faces.
So here's just us, and we can talk about it, we can fight about it, and then we can get it resolved and get it going.
Just do it.
We've had to rely mostly on organic growth. We recently paid for advertising, and it was such a flop. God.
Yeah, we did it once. We
like a banner ad for something. I won't say where we placed it, but like I guess there's something known as banner blindness, which I should have really paid more attention to.
It was like $200, and it was just like,
we will write about that. We will write about.
Please do.
Like what this contest made us, minus all the fees and everything, just because I think I have never read that anywhere. And it'd be so interesting to know,
that would be.
How did we promote it? How did we did we meet our target of, that would be interesting.
That was my conversation with Karan Kapoor and Shannon Mann of Only Poems. You can go to the show notes to find links to all of their shit. They were again just incredibly good sports, and I hope to get them on again sometime soon. Now, here is a brief preview of the most recent episode of The Secret Show. To hear the rest, you can go to SLEERICKETS.substack.com and sign up for... you can get a week's access for free to all of the 80-plus episodes in the tank, and you get a new episode every week. I don't imagine I can teach any of you anything about 18, but I had a slightly new realization about it, or at least like a slightly new perspective on it just today. So I thought I might share a word about that. It is related to a thought I've had lately about translation. I've been reading Chris Childers' really extraordinary collection, Greek and Latin lyric verse, the Penguin Book of Greek and Latin Lyric Verse, this 900-page anthology. It's really extraordinary. And the things he did with meter are even more impressive than I had initially thought. I do want to... I'm going to be talking to him in a couple weeks about translation, and I want to touch on that a little bit, because his scheme for meter in this book is kind of mind-blowing. It like as ambitious as I already knew the book to be, it's even way more ambitious than that. So I've been reading that and really impressed by it, and his really excellent companion essays for the book as well. And I've read a couple really smart essays by another translator, Jim Cates. He publishes as J. Cates. He's primarily a Russian translator, but he has a good essay in the Harvard Review about translating Horace 1.5, the Pyrrha poem. It's very, very famous. Weirdly, I mean, a poem lots of really good people have translated, including the Anthony Hecht version, sort of a loose version that has come up on this podcast before. It is just a poem I don't get the appeal of. For whatever reason, it's addressing an old girlfriend and kind of making fun of her new boyfriend who doesn't know what he's gotten himself into. And it has a well-developed maritime analogy built into it. And I just don't find it to be moving. But it is a much translated poem. And Cates has a really good essay called Getting Horace Across about some of the difficulties in translating it. He also has a really good essay called Bottoms Up, which is about having one's own work translated. He sent this to me because I mentioned to him that I recently, for the first time, have had one of my poems, for the first time to my knowledge, have had one of my poems translated into a foreign language. And my response to, because a woman wrote to me and very kindly asked my permission to translate it into Slovenian. I think. Wait, do they speak Slovenian? I know Slovenia is a country. Is Slovenian the South Slavic language of the Slovenians? Huh. So maybe it's sort of like Chinese, like it's actually, there were kind of multiple languages. Slovene or Slovenian, a Western member of South Slavic languages, which belongs to the Balto-Slavic branch of the Indo-European language family. Okay, well, all right. So she wrote to me asking my permission to translate a poem of mine into Slovenian, and I said, sure. It's very flattering, of course, to have someone ask that. I was touched, and I thanked her and said I would be honored for her to translate my poem. But at the same time, my thought was like, well, what? Like, what would that be? Like the poem, it's a little sonnet, and it's sort of it's like a tissue thin poem as it is. And so then translating it into another language and like losing whatever charm there is in the English, it just felt like it's not like it's that rhetorically meaty a poem. There just isn't that much there to translate. So I was a little puzzled, and it was just hard for me to get my head around like what could be valuable about that. Despite knowing, and this was the thing I said to Jim Cates, was that like at the same time, of course, there are lots of poems I love that I know chiefly or entirely in translation. And so I, while I don't imagine that poem of mine to be on the same level of accomplishment as some of my favorite, poems in other languages that I don't speak, I get that is a thing that can happen. So anyways, it's got translation on my mind. So Bottoms Up, the essay I mentioned, was Jim's essay about having his own poetry translated for the first time, and having many misgivings about it, and feeling a lot of sympathy for all of the people whose work he had translated over the years, and felt like he now newly understood them. So, as I said, I've had translation on the mind, and boy, translators think more about language than maybe any other kind of poet. Like the depth and the seriousness with which Chris and Jim confront every word in every poem that they read or write or translate or think about is really humbling. And in both cases, this is not always true, but in both cases they have, and especially Chris, they have like a real serious understanding of and appreciation for meter and the larger shape of the poem as well. It's not just about denotation. They're very sensitive to sound and to the sense of a word in its original, in its native tongue and in its native context as well. Both of them have talked about that it's not enough simply to translate on a one-to-one basis. Even the even if you're capturing the meter and the rhyme when applicable and the sense and the scope, you still need to think about how the original landed in its original context and how this new version is going to land for the people reading it today in this language. So they're both just really, really thoughtful about language, and that's been true in my experience of all of the translators I've known, and even the poets I've known who don't always or exclusively translate when they are talking about or thinking about translation. They tend to be even more conscientious than they are, when they're sort of merely writing poems on their own or reading poems in their native tongue. A thought that occurred to me, and I say this I don't say this in order to point out any flaws in Chris's work or Jim's work, but it is a thought that occurred to me was that what might be I have been really, I've been thinking a lot about the line that Jonathan, it starts his essay about, or his review of Jose Olivares' new book, Promises of Gold. He mentioned it when we spoke about Lucille Clifton's work. He talked about, the line is something to the effect of, every poet has to decide what kind of bad poet he's going to be. Though I'm sure Jonathan doesn't use the masculine pronoun in that case. But it's something I've thought a lot about, and the conclusion I came to recently was that if there is an aesthetic soft spot or weakness that translators might have as a rule, then I think that weakness might be voice. And the reason this came to mind was that I think when looking for just the right word, the word that serves all of the different functions that the original word does in the original poem in its original context, it can be so difficult to find just the right word in a new language that I think there is sometimes a tendency of translators to get too excited about finding just the perfect word that manages somehow to thread the needle to pass through all of the holes of the axe heads as in Odysseus' feet at the end of the Odyssey. There is a film company, by the way, that made their animation when they're a film production company. So when they are involved in the production of a movie, they have this little animation at the beginning of the movie, like all production companies do, to advertise themselves. And their animation is that moment from the Odyssey when Odysseus fires an arrow through, I think it's through like 50 axe heads, and they got it wrong. They have a bunch of axes lined up, and they're hollow blades, like they're blades that have holes in the blade. And so he fires them through the blades of the axes. And like, that's not only not, I believe, what is intended in the Odyssey, but it's also not as impressive as what's intended in the Odyssey, which is that they are axe heads. That is, the axe handle has been removed from them, and the hole he is firing the arrow through is the same hole that the axe handle would go into. So it's this little circle, and he's firing a single arrow through like 50 of those things lined up, right? So he's firing it hard enough that it doesn't, the curve doesn't drop before it exits the final axe head. Not that that's remotely possible using actual Earth physics, but I am annoyed every time I see that production company animation. I think, no, it's so much cooler than what you're showing us. But I think similarly, translators, if translators have a tendency, right? If we all have tendencies to go wrong in one direction or another, I think the tendency of the translator might be, if there's a kind of a native vocational risk, it might be to lose track of voice because you are too captivated by a particular verbal selection. To hear the rest of that episode, go to SLEERICKETS.substack.com and sign up today for The Secret Show. It is pretty fucking cheap. You can reach me, as always, at SLEERICKETS@gmail.com. Let me know. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about Karan and Shannon. Let me know what you think about Only Poems and whatever else. I am grateful to you all for listening and for being such active and honest correspondents. With any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.